Tonight's talk is called German Madness in the Middle Ages, Part 2. And as I was describing last time, I took you up to basically the end of the 1200s. This last massacre, I know it gets one after the other, but that is unfortunately a part of what the Middle Ages was in 1298. And today we're going to be covering the period of the 1300s and 1400s, what they call the 14th, 15th centuries. And as far as the Jews are concerned, most of the Jews in Europe live in Germany, or the Holy Roman Empire was called at that time, for better or worse. Actually, it was the second largest. The largest is Spain, but Germany is the second largest, the Ashkenaz as they call it. And the general history of the Holy Roman Empire in the second half of the Middle Ages is one in which you have the slipping power of the Holy Roman Emperor. And I told you last time, and it's true for Jews everywhere, that you need a very strong government for a minority to have any chance to survive. You need that. They should put the fear of God in you, that people should be afraid to break the law. Because if you leave it to the demagogues and you leave it to the mobs, we know, as I speak right now, that the mobs are raging around the world, in Paris and in other places, and the police just aren't strong enough or make a choice not to be strong enough to do anything about it. The Jews, as we've seen, had always bought protection from the Holy Roman Emperor. That is what the Middle Ages is all about. You get to the person at the top, and you make it in his interest. You have no choice. You make it in his interest or her interest to have you there and to give you basic protection for family, property, the kind of thing hopefully one would take for granted, which one could not take for granted in the Middle Ages. And the guarantee is worth less and less as the emperor gets weaker. So all through the 1300s and the 1400s, the Jews are always paying top dollar, but its value of that promise is less. We have charters of promises and guarantees that have been preserved in museums. You can go to Europe there and see them today, and the Latin, all the rest of it, in which the guy said, I promised the Jews this, that, and the other. But he can't deliver. And yet at the same time, if you don't have a promise, it's even worse. And so there you have the old gullus of our ancestors. Are we okay here with that sound? Yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay. One example that we saw last time was when this guy named Rindfleisch in Bavaria just went on a rampage because he said God told him to kill all the Jews, and they did. Well, in the 1330s, the same thing happened exactly in Alsace, where some nut named Arnold von Usingheim, you can see the picture there. There you go. Says he said the same thing. He said God appeared to me, told me to kill all the Jews, and he gets together a whole bunch of followers naturally, and they run crazy throughout Alsace, that whole province, which was a heavy Jewish province in those days. I'll read you the exact details. Series of persecutions, a band of marauders who in 1338 and 1339, remember those years, 38 and 39, massacred a large number of Jews in Alsace. A nobleman of Franconia, pretending that an angel had commissioned him to do so, gathered a band of desperados and pillaged and murdered all the Jews, and they called themselves the Judenschlager, which is the Jew beaters. You see? Sometime later, an innkeeper in Upper Alsace named Zimberlin followed the example set in Franconia, and he tied pieces of leather around his arms, and he told his followers to do the same, and they came known as the Armleder, the leather around the arms, and they went around killing all the Jews. This is what that guy, that son of a gun, was trying to do in France, that African comedian with the new Nazi salute or something like that. The Armleder, if you wore that, that was a sign you remember the KKK, so to speak, in the 14th century. And you can just imagine what a Jew does when you see somebody walking on the street, and I mean, tomorrow, next day, I'm going to get you. And what can you do about it? You can't do anything about it. The emperor promised protection. The city promised protection. The governor in the region promised protection. But it's 50-50. Maybe they'll be there when it's necessary. Maybe they won't be when it's necessary. The lords of Alsace, under the leadership of the Bishop of Strasbourg, formed an alliance which pledged themselves to pursue these guys because it got out of hand. We all know lawlessness rarely confines itself to a small group. First, you burn down these houses and kill these people. Then you go after someone else and someone else. And who knows if they'll only stop burning down the Jewish stores. Maybe they'll also burn down the store of a Christian guy to whom they owe money. It's a narcotic. It's dangerous to allow lawlessness. And so the various nobles get together, and 15 of his most prominent followers joined the bishop, but it's very difficult to attack these guys. And in the following year, a knight named Rudolf of Anlau made an agreement with the leader, granting him an amnesty to him and his followers, provided that for the next 10 years they would refrain from molesting the Jews. See, here we are with Israel and Hamas. I say, what are you know what I'm talking about? The Muslims, the real from Muslims, they say like this: we'll never make a peace with Israel. We'll give you a 10-year, what they call I forgot the different terms. Get a hudna or something. In other words, as a temporary measure. But don't think there's any kind of long-term measure. Now, what makes all this tragic, I mean, the whole thing is tragic, but it makes the events became irrelevant or surpassed by a much greater problem that hit 10 years later. Because by the time the 10 years were up, bubonic plague, the great black plague that hit the world and Europe and killed half the people on the planet. Okay? Now, I don't think today they know for sure, and I'm certainly not a scientist or a doctor or any kind of expertise with diseases and this sort of thing, but I know enough to know that obviously a terrible pandemic hit the world, and obviously the medicine didn't exist. It was all wrong, and they didn't know anything of what is necessary to do in such a situation, assuming that something could. I think they called the bubonic plague because they got these buboes, they got these things, terrible growths all over you. So everybody looked horrible and disfigured. Let me see here. Wait. There you go. You see the terrible pictures over there? That's from that time, by the way. That's from a contemporary document. And when you realize that they knew nothing of basic hygiene, they simply didn't know, then you understand that you have a perfect storm. It's a terrible plague brought from Asia through rats and things like that. Added to the fact that everybody lives in pigsty conditions. Europe at this time didn't believe in taking baths. I'm sure you know that, and I mean that seriously. They didn't consider, in general, you and I live in an unbelievably antiseptic environment compared to what it was once upon a time. Because we don't have horses, and we don't have animals walking around and doing whatever they do, and the streets are different than what they were once upon a time, and we freak out if the garbage bag gets torn or something like that. But you imagine when you had pigs and whatever running all over the place, eating, the garbage, and in other words, it's a what's the right word? It's a paradise for bacteria, and things like this. And, yeah, there's various theories about it. They blame the cats, but even if they wouldn't have killed the cats, right? Which I'm always in favor of. He says, even if they wouldn't have done that, they wouldn't solve the problem because you're dealing with a major medical issue. Which, to be perfectly honest, even if it hit today, I'm not a doctor. Even if today would be a major challenge. You understand? It'd be a public health challenge of the first magnitude, and Kal v'chomer in the 14th century. Now, here's the point. This was an unprecedented catastrophe. Now, you and I are sitting here in the smug year, 2014, when we're all scientifically educated and all the rest of it. But take yourself back to the 1300s, the middle of the 1348, 49, 50, and the early 50s. And look around and see that everybody's dying. And they were. And no one knows how to stop it, and they're dying in a horrible way, too. It's the hand of God. You understand? Why is this happening to us? And they probably thought, like the people did in the time of Noah, the world is coming to an end. And we have many writings and things of this nature in which the world is coming to an end. They didn't know how to properly evaluate it. Why has it come? Since it's a question that can't be answered, a lot of different answers were proposed and popped up by different thinkers in Europe. Some of them said it's a punishment by God for our sins. That works. The Bible always says that whenever you have a terrible plague, it's a punishment by God's sins. Europe was not short on the sins. To be perfectly honest, it's spread all over the world. So Asia, there's always plenty of sins to go around. No question about that. Another explanation was, and this is a very contemporary one. The other explanation was, it's a biological warfare attack. If Chas v'sholem, such a thing, God forbid, if such a thing hit today, a country, it's like a movie from the 1960s. If something like this hit the country, it's attacked by evil genius or by somebody. We would have said the Russians. Nowadays they'll say Al Qaeda or something like this. Whoever your boogeyman is, that's the one who did it. And to be perfectly honest, as far as I'm aware, the only thing holding one country from doing it to the other is that the other country can do it back to you. Believe you me, Egypt, Syria, and all these other countries, Egypt, Syria, and others would like to do it to Israel, but they know Israel could do it back to them. You get it? So it's a balance of terror, which always terrifies me because you have state actors and you have non-state actors. These terrorist groups, they wouldn't mind if both countries go down as long as Israel goes down. And therefore, we're that close to biological attacks. Now, if that's true, who is launching the biological warfare against mankind? Of course, the answer is the Jews, right? Or the witches. Meaning, what group is invested in the mind of Christians in Western Europe in 1350 in wanting to kill everybody around? Well, all the people who are dying are Christians. So obviously some group that hates the Christians. This is the mentality that swept through a lot of people's minds. And it's either the witch or it's the Jews, you see? And both of them got killed. But the Jews is very a catching type of what's the right word? Narrative. The Jews get together and they do something very fiendish. And God knows they hate us because we've been persecuting them. And therefore, what do they end up doing? If you can see it here, they're going to poison the wells. Okay? And the Jews are accused and killed whole communities in Switzerland, in France, in Germany, all these times, because they launched a biological warfare attack, or as they called in the Middle Ages, they poisoned the wells. And if we fix it, they have pictures of from that time, where they show you that, here's the Jews going and pouring junk into the water supply. They couldn't imagine that it was due to their lack of hygiene or things of this nature. Because after all, who would be so nefarious to do such a terrible deed that would kill men, women, and children, except the Jews? Now, some historians have always conjectured that the Jews were cleaner. And if you were young, you heard this maybe in high school or something like that. They're angry because the Jews were more hygienic. That's baloney. The Jews were no more hygienic than anyone. I shouldn't say no more hygienic than anyone else, but that's not true. The average person over there took a bath maybe twice a year. The Jew took a bath once a week. But let me tell you something. Taking a bath once a week doesn't make you particularly hygienic. Second of all, they didn't know about soap and all that kind of stuff in the 14th century. And to go to a dirty mikveh and such places is not calculated to advance the cause of hygiene. So Judaism is marginally more into washing in a ritualistic way than other cultures. There's no question about that. But not enough in my mind, not enough in the mind of thoughtful and serious historians in the last 50 years to justify the idea that, because of that, a pandemic didn't hit them. You could be as clean as you want if the type of, we have doctors here who can tell you, the type of disease spreading I'm talking about hit, it doesn't matter how many times you take a shower. You understand? You talk about, the spread of terrible diseases. So those are the popular kind of picture. Yes. So a string of massacres happens by Christians even as the Christians are dying. That's what gives it such a macabre kind of quality to what happens during this period. In Basel, in Germany, in Holland, and places like that, they're killing the people. The people who killed the Jews a week or two later or 3 weeks later are dead because it hits them. You understand? So it's weird, but it's the idea, like Samson, take them down at least with the Philistines. And so, usually the Jews are just slaughtered. In the city of Mainz, the Jews made a JDL, like you read about in Paris the other day. They formed a couple guys to go fight the mob that was attacking the synagogue. And they killed a couple of hundred of the mob. But in the end, they were overwhelmed, and they were slaughtered because, at the end of the day, the Jews are a small group, a small minority, and they can't fight back. I mean, they can fight back, but I mean, it's a hopeless cause. Because if you have a whole city and a whole town and huge groups against you, and you're so small a number, and after all the heroism is over, which we do admire, it has no chance. Now, at this time, you have a funny situation in which you have a bad Holy Roman Emperor and a good Pope. Right? The emperor at that time was Ludwig IV, and the Pope was Clement VI. Louis IV was exactly what I kept saying. Give me more money and I'll sign you more protection paper. But every time something happens in a town, he basically says like this. He says, you shouldn't have done it, but I have no intention of punishing the perpetrators. Well, what does that message send you? Okay? That's a poison message itself. And the news spreads immediately all over Germany. But the Jews simply don't know what to do. They can only go back and try to give more money again. That's the only way they know of dealing with the situation. Maybe this time he'll really keep his word, but he never does. On the other hand, the Pope in Rome, Clement VI, let's put it this way. He tries to use reason, but to no avail. Clement is a very interesting person in the history of the papacy, and he writes exactly what you were mentioning before. It's a very interesting papal bull that he writes in which he says like this. False rumors are being spread about the Jews. This is stupid. They're dying too. This is what he writes. He says the rumors, it's not true. They're dying too. Second of all, he says, this is crazy. There are huge